So hear me out. You own an old Jeep, you know, maybe a YJ, maybe a TJ, and you've got a cracked exhaust manifold. So you go online, you buy a cheap Chinese $65 manifold, and you go through a couple hours of work to get it installed like I just did on that one, and then it doesn't seal up. And why doesn't it seal up? Because the flanges are the wrong thickness. So I'm gonna go over here and show you what I'm talking about, and then we're gonna go over some options of how you can correct it. Now, I was trying to just make a normal like how to repair video, and then everything went sideways, so we're shifting gears here. So as you can see, I put this all back together, and the intake won't seal. And why won't it seal? Well, take a look at that bolt head. You see how crooked that washer is? You see how thick this exhaust flange is and how thin the original intake flange is? So this washer is putting all the pressure on the exhaust and basically none of the pressure on the intake. So this thing has a massive intake leak now. And basically all of these Chinese manifolds are the same. From what I gather from the internet, they're all like that. And so your choices are either to take a grinder and like grind some of this lip. On this 2.5, there's 4 bolts that share between the exhaust manifold and the intake manifold. There's one here, one in the same spot in the back, and 2 underneath. So we either have to grind some of that away, or we can take these really thick washers and try to make a stepped washer. So basically grind it down to paper thin on this side and leave it full thickness over there. We could even try to shim it, but those could fall out. So the whole point being, this was a paid job for me, and now I have to tear the whole thing back apart and start over. Okay, so I am gonna take this marker and I'm gonna mark out roughly where the end of this washer is on here, just so I have a reference when I go to take it apart and I know how far I need to grind. I'm gonna try to reach the other ones, but I'm probably just gonna have to wing it on those bottom 2. So I just pulled the bolt, and man, you can really see the thickness difference there now. So I'm gonna try to just grind this one with the carbide burr, and the same with that back one, and we'll fire it up and see if that intake leak goes away. Let's see, eeny, meeny, miny, mo. I think I like this one for the job. Actually, this one's similar, but it has some burring on the head too.
A few minutes later.
Okay, so there's my grinding job on the first one. So it's a lot closer to even with the intake. It's not perfect, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So our next victim is right there. It's going to be a little harder to get back there. As you can see, I've unplugged and moved the injector harness and a few other things. If you're from the Midwest and the sirens go off, that means come outside and look for the nadir. Alright, so I skipped ahead. I removed the intake. So you can see I've already ground down this one, and this is where these 2 are. So I figured I don't have to pull this all the way off. I should be able to get in there with old trusty here, and I just took a marker, marked how far I need to grind. Same thing on this one. This heat shield might get in my way, but if I have to, I'll trim some of it out of the way so that I can get in there. And I was able to do this one with the intake still on as well. It's a little uglier than the front one, but I'm gonna measure it and make sure that it's, you know, close to the same thickness as the intake runner. Also, just a little tip, if you buy one of these, it has the EGR port and whatever this is, like a O2 bung, and I think that's for the old YJs, and the TJ doesn't use those because the O2's down there. So none of this shit's tight. It comes installed loose. So like, these are 13s. Make sure you tighten those up. This thing will have a crush washer in it. I tightened it up. It still leaked like a sieve, so I'm actually gonna take this out and make a little circular gasket out of the old intake exhaust gasket to try to get that one to seal up. So anyway, right now I'm gonna pull these bolts out and start grinding away at this. So as for some of the tools I'm gonna use in this video, I'm gonna leave links down in the video description and in the comments to stuff like the carbide burrs. These only cost me about 20 bucks. Some of them are like upwards of 40 bucks. You just gotta look around on Amazon. This was about a $40 or $50 air die grinder. It's a Suntech, works pretty good. And then also these purple stripper discs. These things are like the best things I've ever used. They don't chew into the metal unless you really just stay on one spot, but they're so good at getting like rust, paint, and just corrosion and scale and all that stuff off. So if you are gonna do this, those will be down there so you guys can find that stuff easy. Don't drop that in there. So this actually isn't the first time this happened to me. The very first time that I did the manifold on my YJ right there, I had the same thing happen. I ordered a Speed Daddy header because mine was cracked, and it was the exact opposite problem though. The flange was actually too thin, so the bolts were hitting the intake and sealing that up, but they wouldn't seal the exhaust. So it's kind of the same thing, just flip-flopped. It's really obnoxious, and it seems like these manufacturers, like they must just not realize that the bolts are holding more than just the exhaust manifold. And this is what we're left with, is either finding an OEM one that isn't cracked or modifying. All right, I got all them suckers ground out. I threw the intake back in. I just put one bolt in and just ran it up to snug, but you can see that washer is like a lot closer to straight now. It's not perfect. I might have actually ground too much off of here, but I think it's close enough that it's gonna pull this in tight now. So hopefully those ones I did underneath, I got enough. They were really hard to reach, and I'm kind of sorry I didn't record that. It just keeps raining on and off, and I just don't want to leave my camera up. So let's find out if this works. All right guys, it's all backed on, it's all back torqued down. I'm not going through all this stuff because this is just supposed to be seeing if grinding these down is gonna work. So I'm gonna finish hooking up all these harnesses and all that shit, and then we'll test fire it. Whoops, wrong hole. So it wouldn't quit raining yesterday, but as you can see, I came out here this morning, we got it running. There is still a small little exhaust leak, but it's actually at the downpipe where it bolts to the manifold, and no amount of like moving the pipe and retorquing it is getting it to leak. I think his flange is kind of out of round, and I think he needs a new downpipe. So I'll show you the Jeep in a minute, but it appears my grinding job did work. Everything is sealed around that. I did have a massive vacuum leak because one of his vacuum or evap elbows going into the intake was rotten. So I was chasing my tail on that one for a while because it was idling at like 2,000 RPMs, and it was making me think that the intake manifold was still leaking. But that's all settled now. I'm actually getting ready to take this thing for a little test rip. I'm just kind of letting it run and smoke the oil off of that new manifold. But moral of the story is, if you do need to trim those down with a carbide burr like what I did, or whatever you got, it seems to work as long as you do it right. Really doesn't sound too bad. Just a tiny little leak down at the bottom. So right there you can see about how much I ground off of that flange. You see how thick it is right here, and then it drops down, and my washer is now pretty level. So on this 2.5, like I said, there was 4 spots you have to do that. It seems to be working, and we're gonna go take this thing for a rip. And these little 4-bangers kind of suck. Well, this one's going back to the customer under the assumption it needs a downpipe still. I don't know if he wants me to do it or not, but overall it's pretty good. It runs good. It's not that loud. It's just a little teeny tiny puff of air out of that manifold. One more thing, guys, if you want to just fix your cracked manifold, I can show you how to do that. This customer didn't want, I told him it was a small crack, I could weld it, but he insisted that we use the manifold he bought. So I'm keeping this old one, and I'm actually going to repair it, and I'll show you what all that takes. So this one had a crack on the back side between cylinder 1 and 2.
It's kind of hard to see, but basically what you do is you clean it up until you can find the end of the crack, then you drill a hole in it. These are bigger holes than I recommend drilling, but all my little drill bits are snapped. That was like literally the smallest bit I had. So then I also like to grind out along the crack, and you can kind of see it in there. So this one wasn't too bad at all, and it's gonna be a real easy fix. So I'm gonna preheat this with a torch. I'm gonna weld it up with my MIG welder. Then I'll have a spare 2.5 manifold laying around. Now it is a little bit pitted because all his bolts were loose, and I think the back side of it rusted a little bit, but I got it cleaned up with that stripper disc, and I'm sure she'll work again. She'll live to see another day. So again, if you don't want to deal with this flange thickness issue highlighted in this video, this is an option. I hope this was helpful for you guys. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.